Today we are talking about how scientists have discovered the secret of creation in a recent experiment. What we're actually going to be talking about here is how scientists have discovered how they can create matter from nothing. And we're going to see this actually does involve the secret of how everything exists and how we are here to begin with, the very essence of existence. And it's going to even dive into some things rooted into the occult. It's going to be a very, very interesting topic indeed. So there was a recent experiment done, and if we bring up this article here, we can see that this says that scientists create matter from nothing in a groundbreaking experiment. So let's take a look and see what's going on, what has actually happened here, and how this relates to the secret of creation, because this is something that we talk about a lot on my channel. And hey, if you're new, please hit like and subscribe. If you're seeing this video, this is probably something that interests you, and I have a lot more things that would interest you. So we talk a lot about how reality is mathematical, and we talk a lot about how reality is related to nothingness. And so we're going to see how scientists have gotten extremely close to this, and how this is rooted in many things that the public, and just humanity at large has wondered about for eons. So we've all probably heard the phrase that you can't make something from nothing. And even in so many, a lot of different religions and things like that as well, there's this idea of creation from nothingness. So what does this exactly mean? But in reality, the physics of our universe isn't that cut and dry. So it would seem crazy to most people to think that something could emerge from nothing. And one has to really realize that there is a difference between nothingness and non-existence. And that is the key to understanding all of this. And we're going to really dive into what that means. But this is extremely important to understand, because most people think that nothingness and non-existence are the same thing. But that's actually not true, because non-existence can't exist by definition. If you want to know more about this, watch my video called The Answer to the Greatest Philosophical Question of All Time, where I explain why reality must exist and why it must exist in the specific way that it does now. But it's important to understand that non-existence and nothingness are not the same thing. Non-existence cannot exist, but nothingness must exist. And we're going to see what that really means and what this has to do with a recent experiment done. So we probably all heard the phrase, you can't make something from nothing. But the physics of our universe isn't that cut and dry. In fact, scientists have spent decades trying to force matter from absolutely nothing. And now they've managed to prove that a theory first shared 70 years ago was correct. And we really can create matter out of absolutely nothing. Now, something I'd like you to reflect on that as well is, if we can create matter from nothing, are we not gods? And I'm going to explain what that means in terms of God, but not any kind of creator God, but us as God. Because really what we're doing is we're discovering our abilities. We're discovering what we can do. So the universe is made up of several conservation laws, and these laws govern energy, charge, momentum, and so on down the list. In the quest to fully understand these laws, scientists have spent decades trying to figure out how to create matter, a feat that is far more complex than it even sounds. We've previously turned matter invisible, but creating it out of nothing is another thing altogether. There are many theories on how to create matter from nothing, especially as quantum physicists have tried to better understand the Big Bang and what could have caused it. And this is where the important issue comes in when we're talking about the secret of creation. Because we're going to see that creating matter from nothing is linked to the universe springing into existence from the Big Bang, and how that this can actually occur logically. So, rather than it being an illogical impossibility, as how it's often presented. So, we know that colliding two particles in empty space can sometimes cause additional particles to emerge. This is, this is done all the time. The Large Hadron Collider and different experiments. There are even theories that a strong enough electromagnetic field could create matter and antimatter out of nothing itself. But managing to do any of these things has always seemed to be impossible. Still, that hasn't stopped scientists from trying, and now that research seems to have paid off. As Big Think reports, in early 2022, a group of researchers created strong enough electric fields in their laboratory to level the unique properties of a material known as graphene. With these fields, the researchers were able to enable the spontaneous creation of particle-antiparticle pairs from nothing at all. Now, this proved that creating matter from nothing is indeed possible, a theory first proposed by Julian Schwinger, one of the founders of quantum field theory, and with that knowledge, we can hopefully better understand how the universe makes something from nothing. So this is extremely important here. They are talking about the spontaneous creation from nothing of a particle-antiparticle pair. So we can think of this as a positron and electron, or matter and antimatter. So what scientists have been able to do is create from nothing an antimatter and matter, positron-electron pair. That's going to be extremely important because it's coming forth in a pair rather than just being a singular thing on its own. So I want to dive into this a little further to show why this is so important. In this article here, this says physicists prove you can make something out of nothing by simulating cosmic physics. So a team of physicists say that they have proven a 70-year-old quantum theory where something can be created out of nothing. An experiment designed to study the flow of valence, the study of low valence electrons, accidentally succeeded in producing an analog of particle-antiparticle pairs where nothing had previously existed. Using only an electric field and the nearly magical properties of the 2D material graphene, the experiment was performed in January. So previous theories held that this process could only take in environments like in the vicinity of a black hole or center of a neutron star, but they were able to do it using standard lab equipment. And I just want to get to, okay. So in physics, there are situations where individual particles can be manipulated to create additional particles seemingly from nothing. For example, if you take a quantum particle known as a meson and try to rip its quark, a brand new set of particle-antiparticle pairs will emerge between them from nothingness of empty space. Still, the situation involves starting with something, but what they have been able to do now is do this from essentially creating something out of pure nothingness. Now a team of researchers have shown this effect is real by essentially creating something out of pure nothingness. So I want to, in the universe we inhabit, it's truly impossible to create, hold on. Okay, I just want to make sure that we have enough background information to really dive into this. And yeah, I think that's about it. So you have this idea of being able to create. Man, there are so many ads. It's getting really annoying. To create this idea of having nothing at all, but with it producing a matter and antimatter pair, positron and an electron. And the reason why that this is necessary is because what reality is, and we talked about the difference between nothingness and non-existence, and we talked about how reality is mathematical. So we can start to really understand this in a mathematical way. If reality is a mathematical way, if reality is mathematical, what's going on here? Because what's going on, you from a logical perspective, you cannot have non-existence and produce something from it. That is a logical impossibility. That cannot happen. But you can have nothingness and produce from it a pair of balanced opposites. So we can even, I told you this has, we can even go back to the ideas of Aleister Crowley. So Aleister Crowley has what's known as the 0 = 2 formula. Okay. So what is the 0 = 2 formula? Obviously 0 doesn't equal 2. That's crazy, right? You can't have 0 equaling 2. It can't. But what the 0 = 2 formula means is that 0 is equivalent to 2 opposites. Namely, if you had 0, you can equate it to +1 and -1, right? So think about it. Think of the equation. 0 equals 1 minus 1. 0 is equivalent to a +1 and a -1. Now, if you think of, most people think of mathematics as being abstract, as in just, scratch marks on paper. They don't equate mathematics to being something that corresponds to reality itself. So what I mean by that is if you think of the numbers as if they were actually real, as if they corresponded to aspects of existence. So if you think of these numbers as if they actually correspond to existence, what you have is 0 is equal to two things, a positive thing and a negative thing. You see, 0 equals 1 minus 1. 0 is equivalent to two things, a positive thing and a negative thing. So that's what Crowley means by the 0 equals 2 formula. He's not literally saying 0 equals 2. He's saying 0, nothingness, is equivalent to a unity of opposites. Now, what we do here is we realize that we can, reality being mathematical, from what is a 0 or nothingness, looking at 0 and nothingness from another way, it is a unity of opposites. So what is occurring here, and the reason why matter and antimatter pairs can be produced, is because what's happening is not that they're just popping into existence from absolutely non-existence. What you're doing, so to speak, mathematically, because this is a mathematical universe, is that you're manipulating the way that reality is being experienced into a different perspective. You see how you have imagine you have 0 and u equals 1 minus 1. Well, you could just look at the 0 side by itself, or and totally ignore the 1 minus 1 part, or you could look at the 1 minus 1 part and completely ignore the 0. You see how they are two different things, yet they are the same thing. And that's really important to understand. It's to start to look at mathematics as corresponding to actual aspects of reality rather than being just scratch marks on paper. Because if you're doing an equation at home, you'll write 0 equals 1 minus 1, and you go, well, 1 minus 1 equals 0, so 0 equals 0. But the thing is that we're not saying that the 1 and the minus 1 annihilate each other. The 1 and minus 1 are existing together in tandem, and their total result is equivalent to 0. And so this equation that corresponds to reality can be expressed in different ways. It can be expressed as the 0 side, or it can be expressed as the 1 minus 1 side. So when you have nothing, and then an positron-electron pair are created, they're not actually created. What you're doing is you're just taking that equation where the 0 side is what is prevalent and switching it so that the 1 minus 1 is prevalent. So you see that there isn't some kind of spontaneous creation of, matter from non-existence. That's obviously impossible. What you're doing is that you're manipulating the mathematical properties of reality to take that net 0 and have from it emerge to a pair. And that's why it comes in a pair, because if you were to take a positron and electron, and what happens when you take a positron and electron, they annihilate. And when you annihilate, you're just going from the 1 minus 1 back to the 0 again. So what's happening is, since this is a mathematical reality, when scientists are creating matter from nothingness, it's not that they are breaking. What's happening is that they're literally just manipulating the mathematical properties of existence, and they're finding out ways to do that. So when you look at existence, one has to realize that this is a reality where you can use mathematics to understand existence, because mathematics describes reality. And so by manipulating those laws, you're manipulating reality, because that's what reality corresponds to. So this is another idea. Here is so we have this idea, and we can now understand the process of the Big Bang. Because if we go to the process of the Big Bang, the whole, if you're familiar with the basic idea of the Big Bang, it was, well, at the beginning of the universe, there was nothing at all. And then from an infinitely dense point, absolutely everything sprang forth from it. So basically there was nothing. And then from a point of nothing, everything came. Well, that's obviously crazy. That's crazy if you're coming at it from a materialist perspective where you don't understand that reality is mathematical and you don't understand that reality is mind. Obviously, you can't have total and complete non-existence and then have everything emerge from non-existence. That's impossible. But that's not what happened. There was nothingness, and from nothingness, we had a altering of the cosmic equation. So basically what that means is you have the, when we're talking about simplistic opposites, 0 equals 1 minus 1. That's very, very simple. That's a pair of opposites. And we can kind of understand this positron-electron idea through this very simplistic model. But now imagine that instead of 0 just being equal to 1 minus 1, imagine that 0 is equal to all opposites. Every single number, every single value. So imagine that 0 is equal to every value and every opposite. And that's still a true equation. If you have 0 equal to every possible number and every possible number's opposite, then it's still equivalent to 0. So instead of just 0 equaling 1 minus 1, you have 0 equals 1 minus 1, 2 minus 2, 3 minus 3, 4 minus 4, 5 minus 5, etc., etc. So now, if we go back to, the Big Bang, we can imagine that state being perfectly 0 and perfectly nothingness. And what the Big Bang was, just like the emergence of a antimatter matter pair, was the emergence of everything. You're just flipping the equation around. Of course, I'm being very, I'm describing it this way so it can be understood intuitively. But rather from looking from the 0 side, you can look at it now from the side of everything. You see how 0 is equal to all things. So what's essentially happening is that at the Big Bang, you had the 0 side of the equation, which was nothingness, and essentially what happened was just looking at it from a different perspective, in which everything now emerges from nothing. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that. I'm being very simplistic about it because these numbers are actually equivalent to frequencies, and it's not a matter of actually flipping something around. Of course, what it has to do is symmetry and it has to do with phase change. So basically what that means is if you would, in a simplistic way, if you take all these numbers and they're perfectly balanced, if you kind of mix them up, sort of, we talk about it in that way, it's sort of a mixing up, then you start to experience rather the net 0 side, you start to experience the side of all existence because there's no longer a symmetry there. There's been a symmetry break. And so when there's a symmetry break, you are able to have that experience of difference and extension. Because when you have everything sort of perfectly aligned, perfectly in phase, then if everything is perfectly in phase, there's no longer any difference. So what I mean by that is this is a world of differences. We only have an experience because there are differences. I am here, you are there. I am tall, that person is short, this is blue, this is green. There are many differences, and these differences only exist mathematically because of asymmetries. If there were to be no differences whatsoever, even distance, time, everything would be there would be nothing to experience. There would be nothing, we couldn't experience anything that was other than a singular unity. That would be the only experience that we would have because there would be nothing to differentiate one thing from another. And this was essentially the state prior to the Big Bang, a realm of no difference whatsoever. And mathematically, this is equivalent of perfect balance, perfect and total balance. And when there's a perfect and total balance, you experience that perfectly singular nature of 0. But when that balance is no longer there, then that's what happens is when you get a reality of difference. And with a reality of difference is a space-time reality that we experience now. So at the Big Bang, it was just going from no difference to the beginning of difference. And one of the great things about a reality of difference is why we can now celebrate and experience our diversity in celebration rather than hating other people. That's one very important thing to understand about this, is that we're here to learn, grow, and experience and celebrate our diversity and understand each other and whatnot, rather than hate each other for our differences, because we're intrinsically the same thing, just exploring different aspects of ourselves. And we're doing so every day. But it's important to remember, going back to this idea of the Big Bang, is that at the Big Bang, we can understand simply the 0 equals 1 minus 1 is the positron-electron pair. Now, if we go back to the Big Bang, people wonder like, oh, well, if that's true, shouldn't there be an equivalence of matter to antimatter? Because if you have a positron and an electron pair, well, there's matter, and then there is also antimatter. So if a similar sort of thing went on at the Big Bang, well, one of the questions is, well, then where is all the antimatter? Because you're just extending that equation. Instead of 0 equals 1 minus 1, you're extending it to 0 equals, you could say infinity minus infinity. Now, infinity isn't really a number, it's a concept, but you get the idea just for understanding, a simplistic understanding. We go from 0 equals 1 minus 1 to 0 equals positive infinity plus negative infinity. Again, infinity is a concept, not a number, but you get the idea. You get the idea. And so, well, what about the antimatter? Because antimatter is something that's one of the big questions in science is, where's all the antimatter? Well, we understand, and this is where it starts to get more complex mathematically, and I'm keeping this one as relatively simple as possible because I want this to be, my goal with these videos is to make these things as intuitively understandable as possible. I have other videos that get into this stuff in a lot more detail, dealing with like frequency and phase change and Fourier transforms and all that, and you can go check those out, and I recommend that you do. But sometimes I like to make videos so that I want this information to be as accessible as possible, and sometimes it's not necessary to get into that in that depth because people you'll lose some people, and I want this to be as accessible as possible. So the question is where is all the antimatter? Well, if you start to look at reality, because this is a mathematical reality, if you look at mathematics and you look at a mathematical plane, so technically we would use a complex plane or a Gaussian plane. But basically, you can really understand this by looking at a Cartesian plane. If you look at a Cartesian plane, which is just the x-axis and the y-axis, you'll see that there's different quadrants. And in certain quadrants, you have the positive numbers, and the others you have negative numbers and positive numbers, and you can see that there are different quadrants dealing with the different signs of the numbers. The first quadrant, it's all positive, but not so with the second quadrant, and the third nor the fourth. So being that reality is mathematical and reality behaves in a mathematical way, then these universes will behave in this separation of realms, or you could call them sub-universes of matter and sub-universes of antimatter. Now, we could get into time as well, but I'm not going to talk about time because I want to keep this relatively simple. So in essence, though, what you would have here is universes generated where sub-universes where there is, like in this universe, it would be a universe of matter. But you would also have a universe of antimatter. Now, the reason why that this happens is because mathematically, this is if you look at how mathematics operates and you look at a Cartesian plane, really we'd use a Gaussian plane, but as a Cartesian plane, you see that this is how reality is ordered. It's a good thing that it's ordered this way, because if it wasn't ordered this way, we wouldn't have a realm of space-time. If we just had all, matter and antimatter, everything would be annihilating each other. It's because we're able to have this stable reality that things get separated in the way that they do. And once again, if you take a look at a Cartesian plane and you look at this grid, the y-axis and the x-axis, typically it's called, you can see how reality is they're still all there, right? If you look at the numbers, you still have all the positive numbers and all the negative numbers, but they are partitioned into different quadrants, and we can look at these partitions as different sub-universes. So if our universe, say, is associated with quadrant 1, it'll be a universe of purely matter. Now, we can create antimatter within that universe, but it's foundationally going to only be associated with positive numbers. So in other words, the question is, where is all the antimatter? Literally in another universe. Technically not a universe, but a sub-universe, because there's only one universe, but there are different quadrants within that universe that one could partition into sub-universes. So what's really interesting about this is that this has just gone on for reality being mathematical and reality being equivalent to nothingness. These are ancient ideas stemming from Egyptian ideas, Eastern religions, Greek philosophy, Eastern philosophy. This has been something that has been within these esoteric communities and ideas and philosophy for a very long time. And what you're doing is you're kind of having science just stumble on them. And it's, kind of exciting to be able to see this happening in real time, but also frustrating when people don't really realize what it is that they're looking at. And, this is also if anyone is familiar with the philosophy of Hegel, this is also very similar to Hegelian philosophy, where Hegel looks at reality being one mind, which is a system of logic. So Hegel looks at reality as being a mind that is a structure of logic, or a structure of reason. And that's what mathematics is. Mathematics is a structure of reason. So Hegel looks at reality as being a logical structure, which is a mind. And when you look at his logical system, what Hegel begins with is both being and nothing. So Hegel begins his system of logic and his science of logic with being and nothing. And he equates the idea of being and nothing as being equal to nothing, but also being different at the same time. So he says that being and nothing are the same, yet also different. And this can be really hard for people to understand, but when you understand that this is, for Hegel, a system of logic, and mathematics is a system of reason, a structure of reason, and Hegel said the real is rational and the rational is real, so Hegel is talking about a structure of reason. When you say that being is equivalent to nothing, well, we can understand that very simplistically as 0 equals +1 and -1. You could equate 0 with nothing, and you could equate the +1 and -1 as being. And you could see, there's equivalence between them, the equals. They are the same thing, yet they're also different. 0 is different than 1 and -1. But they're also equivalent, so they're the same. And a lot of Hegel's ideas can be understood in this way that makes it a lot more clear and a lot more lucid. Another way to understand this as well is if you think of the concept of being, because Hegel says that being and nothing are the same yet different. Well, when you think of, one can sort of think of nothingness, and this is in regard to Hegel's system, there's really nothing to think about. But if you're also thinking about being, if you just think about the concept of pure being, and by pure being in philosophy, there isn't even anything that you can ascribe to it, any kind of quality that you can ascribe to it, or else it wouldn't be just pure being anymore. It would have some sort of quality that you have given it. It's just isness. It is just, they call it that in philosophy. They say they have weird terms for things, but it's just, when you're attempting to think of just pure being itself, there's really nothing to think about because it's just being. And this is why being is equivalent to nothing. But then this idea of being and nothing being equivalent yet different, Hegel talks about this being a dialectical synthesis, synthesizing in becoming, and in becoming now you have a reality of constant movement and constant motion, as Hegel sort of talks about nothing that collapses into being and being that collapses into nothing, and from this arises becoming, and then he unfolds his whole logical system, which eventually unfolds into all existence. So Hegel literally starts with the being that is nothing, that is equivalent yet different, that through its dynamic interaction produces all reality in his rationalist system, which is really cool. So you have these ideas, and they're obviously much more easily understood through mathematics, rather than these kind of thought experiments that one has to do that takes some mental gymnastics. So mathematics is much better for explaining these sort of things and making these things lucid. And like I said, you've had many occult systems, even like Crowley, and going all the way back to Egypt, talking about a mathematical reality, the equivalence of reality being nothingness. And you're having this being discovered in modern science by like total accident. They're just out there smashing particles together I mean, of course, it's much more sophisticated than that, but they're discovering these ideas in reality, and they're not even really sure, they don't really realize the importance of what they're looking at. They're looking at the idea of we are able, and this is what we are. We are all reality. And so we produce this reality from ourselves to be able to have this experience together. There's no creator God out there. We are this eternal nothingness, this eternal zero that can explore its infinite self through its many different transformations. And I wish I had that Egyptian quote on hand, because there's this beautiful quote from the Egyptian Book of the Dead that talks about how I am something like, I am the one, I am the two, I am the four, I am the eight. Here are my selves in diversity and transformations. Really, really cool. I did a video on the Egyptian Book of the Dead, so I recommend checking that out. That quote is in there, but it's really, really cool to be able to see these ideas starting to become manifest in science. But this shows that we have this ability to create existence because we are reality that is mathematics. It is being expressed through itself in its diverse ways. You can think of it as, if you imagined it being like a computer code and a video game. You can imagine this code. It's like we are this mathematical code, and you can imagine computer code. When computer code transforms itself and orders it in a certain way, it can create a game universe. And this is what we have done. We are this mathematical code, but we are this living code that through the billions and billions of years of evolution has arranged its pattern to give rise to this reality that we experience right now. And we're able to do this because that code is equivalent to zero. This is why it's possible. That's why there's any kind of existence at all. If that wasn't true, there would be utter insanity and utter chaos. We're only able to do this because of that equivalence to zero. So we're this, and that's just why it's really popular today to think, oh, wow, reality is a simulation. The reason why it seems like a simulation, it's not actually a simulation. We're not on a hard drive on some alien mothership or something like that. The reason why it seems like reality is a simulation is because we are living frequency, living mathematical code that has, through billions of years, arranged itself in such a way that generates this experience that we're having together right now. This dialectical evolution that allows us to have this experience, exactly how a computer code can arrange itself in a certain way to generate a game. This is very, very, similar to, again, Hegelian philosophy, which says that reality is an eternal mind, which is a rational structure. And think about this. Hegel was talking about these ideas before there were computers and computer codes and video games. So the wording might sound strange, but for Hegel to be talking about this is, talking about reality as being a rational structure of mind that orders itself in a certain way that produces this experience of nature, of space-time that we're having together. And through it, the mind learns about itself. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And this is the cool thing. It's very exciting, but also frustrating because so many people don't understand this. But for those who do, it's really exciting because that's what we're literally doing right now. As if you're new to this information and I'm explaining this to you and things are starting to click and you're starting to understand and realize it, that is literally us as the universe coming to know ourselves through ourselves. Like I am an aspect of the universe teaching another aspect of the universe, you, me, which is learning about us as the universe in this realm that we have generated in which we learn about ourselves. So we get really trapped in this human game where we don't have the big picture, and we get really wrapped up in this idea of like our ego identities of, I am Morgan and I have, this past and this history and, I ate this morning and so is running for governor or whatever. And we really get trapped in this story that we've built for ourselves. And we need to really pull back and realize that we are expressions of the universe, which is us getting to know ourselves through ourselves, which is exactly what we are doing right here and right now. And when you really begin to understand that, it gets very exciting, and it gives so much more meaning to life when you understand what reality really is, what you are, where you are, and why you are here. You're not just some random accident here to, be here for 70 years or whatever and get a job, have parties on the weekend, have some kids, buy a house, and die. There's nothing wrong with doing that, by the way. But I'm just saying, we are the universe in this grand game that we have built for ourselves, playing right now and coming to know each other through this. And it's really interesting to see these different experiments happening that are beginning to point people towards understanding this information and this information has been here for so long. Like it's been, constantly trying to communicate this to humanity, and some people get it, some people don't. But as we develop more and more sophisticated ways of understanding existence and technology, and it's becoming to be more widespread. It's almost absurd that humanity hasn't realized this yet, because you think about Hegel realizing this information before there were computers, before there were any kind of programming language, and before you can even think about Pythagoras talking about reality being mathematical. What we can do now, we can use programming language, a code, to create another reality inside of a box, a video game. Going even further to that, with VR, using code, we can create almost an entirely new reality by just putting a headset on and exploring that. The philosophers who had these ideas about existence, Pythagoras, Hegel, all that, if they were alive now, it would be so utterly obvious to them what existence is. Do you know what I'm trying to say? It's ridiculous that humanity hasn't understood this idea yet, because they're doing microcosmic analogs of it themselves. They're using a structure. They're using a logical structure to create mini realities in which they place themselves in video games and VR. This is exceedingly close to what reality actually is, in that we are this mathematical structure that has generated this reality to be able to experience, learn, grow, and understand together. This whole idea of, creating VR realities and all that, it's almost like training wheels or practice for what we truly are. And I don't know, it's just it's kind of funny to me that humanity is already like engaged in these mini world creations, but haven't realized that that's what they're in right now. Not an actual video game, but something very similar. And philosophers were able to understand this basic idea well before any of the, imagine them coming up with this idea when there was none of this technology. Imagine how obvious it would be to them with all this technology around. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm kind of going off topic and on a tangent, but anyway, I need to wrap this up because I always go on way too long, but I just get really excited about this stuff, and I hope you do too. It's really cool and really exciting to be able to see humanity get closer and closer to this sort of thing. You're seeing it everywhere. You're seeing it in, New Age mysticism. You're seeing it in the occult groups starting to gain more popularity. You're seeing it in science beginning to realize that materialism doesn't answer these questions. All these things have major flaws. Like there's a lot of terrible things in all these, but you see that they're all kind of sort of converging as each one is getting little different bits and pieces of the puzzle. They haven't seen the whole thing, and some of them have some crazy pieces in them, but humanity as a whole is starting to wake up and realize, and don't even get me started with social media and TikTok and everything that connects us as a unified whole, and we're beginning to see into each other's lives via the technology that we have. So I'm not going to get started on that, but I hope you find this as fascinating, as interesting as I do. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. I have a lot more videos. This was a very simplistic explanation. I have videos that go in a lot more depth, so check out my videos there. I have playlists, lots of things you can watch. And if you enjoy my work, feel like you've ever learned something or gotten something, consider supporting on Patreon. It helps out a lot. And you get access to our weekly supporters-only live streams. We're having one right after this. And you also get access to our hidden Discord server, The Citadel. And I appreciate it very much. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who does support, especially Zach, Renaissance, Sarah, Cassidy, Michael, Angela, Maria, Top of the World, Ethan, DB, and Storm the Delta. I appreciate it very much.